I'm just gonna.
Sorry. I'm just gonna give 30 seconds. There's an ad playing usually,
okay.
so people start. Pause on a little bit. So 20 seconds. Just start
I'm just
introducing
Yeah.
ourselves. So I'm Ivan. I'm just running a tech behind the scenes.
My name is Ariel Zangla. I'm the reporter who's here with Congressman Chris Gibson, and we're going to be asking the congressman some questions over the next hour and allowing you to talk about some of the things that you're working on. So, Congressman, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give an opening statement, that'd be great.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you to the Daily Freeman Yvonne. Good to be with you again. And Tanya, thank you for your work as well out in the community. I greatly appreciate these moments as far as transparency and accountability to be here for a live editorial board to answer questions from not only Ed Board but also from constituents. And as far as an opening statement, I just want to say first and foremost what a privilege it is to serve. I greatly appreciate this honor to represent the 19th Congressional District, which is 11 counties in upstate New York, including right here in Kingston, obviously today in Ulster County. And I'm going to be hitting 3 points in my opening statement. The first is the legislative work, and then I'm going to be addressing constituent services, and then finally, what I hope, a goal that I've had for my time in Congress is to help restore faith in us, in being a self-governing people. So with regard to legislative work, look, I'm happy to report today, this is the most effective session that I've had over 3 in the United States Congress. And it begins with early on in the session, I was at the White House for a bill signing ceremony for a bill that helps veterans who are suffering with depression and having mental health challenges. This was the Clay Hunt Suicide Awareness and Prevention Bill. Clay Hunt very sadly served our country and took his life, and his family has been very active and certainly worked with us in the Congress. An important piece of legislation that perhaps in the Q&A we can talk more about it, but it supports mental health for veterans. I was a co-author of that bill. And then also I was the co-author of a bill that President Obama also signed that deals with veterans who are starting businesses. Essentially what this bill did is waive the fees for veterans that are working with the Small Business Administration. We think this is really important for veterans to get that leg up as they look to start their business. Look, we have had, our office has been heavily involved in fighting Lyme disease for years, and we've made some modest progress over the years, but the most important progress we think we need to make is addressing the guidelines that come out of the Centers for Disease Control, which in my view are too narrow and lead to misdiagnoses. It also inadequate, inadequate treatment protocols, and finally inadequate healthcare insurance company coverage. Now, last Congress, we passed a bill that dealt with this. Unfortunately, it did not go through the Senate, and so we regrouped this year, and we brought forward the very same bill with the same language, but we were successful in getting it incorporated into a larger bill, a very important bill for the American people that's going to help those suffering from cancers, from heart disease and Alzheimer's, and those on the spectrum, and including now tick-borne diseases. This is H.R. 6, the 21st Century Cures Bill that I helped author, and that we did pass with a overwhelming bipartisan vote in the U.S. House, 344 to 77. The President has issued a statement of support for the bill. We're working now with the Senate, and this is going to be important for our constituents, certainly those suffering from chronic Lyme, but really anyone dealing with the pernicious diseases, including potentially life-ending diseases. Very important bill that we're proud to have been part of. I'm also on the Armed Services Committee, and we were successful in shaping the bill, the National Security Policy Bill. This included the approach that I take for national security, which is peace through strength. And that means restoring the capability of our armed forces and making sure our men and women in uniform have the equipment that they need and the treatment that they need going forward as far as their health care and other benefits. And so on that score, we were successful in getting amendments into the National Security Policy Bill that helped with restoring robustness in our armed forces. We also were successful in getting amendments in that help with research. I mentioned the the welfare, the care of our men and women. Well, one of the areas is dealing with diseases, and we had an amendment that provides for more research that deals with and some innovative approaches to dealing with diseases, and it actually is going to help the SUNY system as far as their competitiveness, particularly their new center at SUNY Albany. And we've also had success in, we have a particular treatment that I have witnessed firsthand that has helped those with post-traumatic stress. And here we're talking about those that have been through so many other different kinds of treatment, and we have not been successful. That we have found a treatment of equine therapy that has been successful, and we had an amendment put in that supports this type of treatment into the National Security Policy Bill. So in addition to those pieces of legislation, we are now the furthest along we've ever been on a bill that helps our Vietnam veterans who are suffering from Agent Orange exposure. This has been reported in the Hudson Valley. This is a bill that I'm working with Senator Gillibrand. We now have over 264 co-sponsors, bipartisan, in the United States House. We have a companion bill with exact language in the United States Senate that was introduced by Senator Gillibrand. We've had hearing, and I think we're in a good place to start to move that this year, and we're very encouraged by that. I've also been heavily involved in the education space on multiple levels. I want the constituents to know that I've been listening. I hear the grave concerns, the serious concerns with regard to Common Core and the testing, and I'm the author of a bipartisan bill along with Kirsten Sinema. She's a Democrat from Arizona, on a bill that rolls back the high-stakes testing back to pre-No Child Left Behind levels. That is building out support, bipartisan support. I'm also working in the space of trying to make college more affordable and dealing with the situation with debt. I know that that's on the minds of so many folks, and I do have a couple bills that I've authored that make a difference in this area as well. The first of which helps farmers. This is a major area of concern for us. We need 100,000 new farmers over the next decade to replace those that are aging out. As proud as we are of our farmers, the average age of a farmer right now is 58. And this is, an independent nation, I believe, should be growing its own food and hopefully growing and consuming locally. And so listening to our farmers, and particularly the leaders in the Young Farmer Coalition, we brought forward the Farmer Success Act, a very serious piece of legislation that if you have a young farmer that has been farming for 10 years, paying back their loan for 10 years, and that they are a full-time farmer, then they would qualify for loan forgiveness at the end of 10 years. Why this is so important is because I mentioned we need 100,000 new farmers. And when you look at the survey data of those that are interested in potentially following the calling of farming, 30% of those ultimately decide not to pursue farming because of student debt. So this bill, we think, will make a positive difference. I also recently introduced a bill, a bipartisan bill with Marcia Fudge, a Democrat from Ohio, and Leon Botstein, the president of Bard College, helped me author this bill. A very important bill that deals with early college and otherwise programs that have high schoolers that are involved in community college in what's called the Smart Scholar program. The issue here is Pell Grant eligibility. Right now, according to U.S. law, you have to be a high school graduate to get access to your Pell Grant. And now we have some juniors, in fact, some folks even younger than junior year, but certainly juniors and seniors who are in these Smart Scholar programs, or in Bard's case, Bard has 7 early colleges where we have high schoolers that are actually participating in early college, and they don't have access to their Pell Grant. So this is a very common sense piece of legislation that would allow individuals to have access to their own Pell Grant if they're in one of these programs. Now, by the way, I think it's important to note that the statistics are that the students that are in these early college or Smart Scholar programs, they're actually graduating at twice the rate of the population at large. So this is not only good for individuals that are pursuing early college, which helps cut the cost ultimately of a 4-year education, but it's also good for the taxpayer because it's a good investment. It saves the taxpayer dollars. In addition to education, I'm also involved in the manufacturing space and helping. We're proud. The president signed a bill that I was a co-author of that helps with the public-private partnership. In fact, there was just a lot of media coverage of this initiative when Vice President Biden came to New York State, went to Rochester with our governor, and they announced the new photonics site. This is related to legislation that the president signed that I was involved with in the U.S. House that's facilitating manufacturing. So that's the first piece. That's my legislative report to you. Proud to say that the Lugar Center ranked me #1 as far as statesmanship, working together in the U.S. House. I think it's reflective of this. We're also very involved in constituent services across the full spectrum, helping veterans, immigration, senior citizens, and local projects, including helping here in Kingston and throughout Ulster County and beyond to help with job creation. And that brings me to my final point, which is restoring faith in government. And I think this is very important. Firm believer in a government of the people, by the people, for the people. I'm following through on my pledges. I said that I would self-impose term limits. This is my final tour in the U.S. Congress. My wife and I also give our pension back that we earned from the United States military, 29 years, so that we would not double dip in the time that I'm serving in the United States Congress as far as restoring faith. And out here today to be accessible and accountable and working on constituent-driven legislation. All these points that I mentioned as far as a legislative agenda comes from the people of the 19th Congressional District, and I hope that I'm doing my part to help restore faith in a government of the people, by the people, for the people. I look forward to questions, so thank you very much.
Okay. I did get several questions from our readers about a variety of issues, but one of the ones that came up a lot is your stance on the Iran nuclear deal. So can you just briefly sum up where you are on that position at this point?
Well, I'm opposed, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, my philosophy is informed by a belief of peace through strength, and I think my bona fides are on that, or not only do I know firsthand the horrors of war, having had 4 combat tours myself and led paratroopers in combat, but also my record in Congress. Look, I don't believe that we should be the world's policeman. I think that we need a strong military as a deterrent to those who would do harm to us. But I think we should be leading with our diplomacy, our commerce and trade, always backed up by the world's strongest military as a deterrent to those that would look to do us harm. That approach has informed me to do everything I could to turn us away from using force in Libya. I'm going back to 2011 now, but I spoke on the floor of the House and worked with my colleagues to try to inform them, based on my experiences, why I thought that was not a good idea to be bombing Libya. I turned out to be right on that score. And then with regard to Syria, I'm going now to 2013. There was a movement. It looked like we were going to bomb Syria. I didn't think that was a good idea. I worked with my colleagues in a bipartisan way to try to illuminate the subject as to why I didn't think it was in our interests, nor in our friends and allies' interests, to bomb Syria. Now, fortunately, we did steer away from that. But only a year later, in my view, a mistake, we brought forward a bill on the floor of the U.S. House to arm the Syrian rebels. I gave that a very close look. I did not think that was a wise idea. I voted against that. So I say that all as to set the stage to say that I believe that I have a record of peace through strength. Now, having said that, when you look at the details of this proposed agreement, in my judgment, I think the probabilities of conflict go up if we adopt this agreement. And that's especially when you consider a couple points. First is how this agreement is being perceived by the neighbors, those that live in the region. And here I'm talking about Israel and the Sunni nations. We should be paying attention to the fact that the left and the right in Israel is united. They are united in opposition to this agreement. They're concerned, and the same goes for the Sunni nations. And why is that so? Well, the concerns that they have are very similar concerns that I have, Senator Schumer and others. The concerns center around verification concerns with regard to the agreement, but also in terms of what the monies that will be provided to Iran when these sanctions are lifted, what that would mean for this regime. This is a regime with a record, like all nations. Iran has a record. They have a record of dissembling and really quite frankly, being duplicitous when it comes to where they are in their nuclear program. They, for years, denied the existence of this, I guess you might say, from their perspective, top secret facility for DOE. They now do acknowledge it, but they denied the existence of it for the longest period of time. It was central to their program. So we know that they've cheated, and they can't be counted on. And so really this turns then on verification framework, and I'll talk to that in a second. But before I do, I should also say this, that look, this nation, Iran, is very open about the fact that they support terrorism and revolution abroad. In fact, the day after the proposal was unveiled, the Ayatollah came out and said nothing's changed. There's nothing in this agreement that precludes Iran from continuing to support Hezbollah, Hamas, the rebels in Yemen, and supporting the Assad regime in Syria. And what is different is the money. They get over $100 billion, in some cases perhaps as much over $150 billion in new money, and the legitimacy of the stamp of the international environment to continue to do what they have been doing. And in fact, in some cases, their activities, the Quds Force, has led to the killing of U.S. service members in Iraq. And I think that for all these reasons, I'm not the only one that has a problem with this, but with this agreement. I do think the administration was right to be engaged in these conversations and these negotiations. And, you know, Geneva II, I think the spirit of it we should sustain. But we should reject this agreement, and we should go back to the negotiating table, and we should work to get a better agreement that precludes Iran from getting a nuclear capability, and also lessens their ability to foment terrorism and support terrorism abroad. And you know, my read of how Israel and how the Sunni nations are viewing this, and keep in mind, even though it wasn't in the interim agreement that was unveiled in April, the final agreement lifts the arms embargo at 5 years, and it lifts the ballistic missile prohibition in 8 years. Now, you know, this is a situation where you're going to have a country that is looking to procure weapons so that they can move them in concert with what the Ayatollah has said is their ideology, and a nation that's looking to perfect their intercontinental ballistic missile program at a time that we're lifting the arms embargo. And keep in mind, there are nations that want to sell to Iran. Why? Because they can benefit from the monies. And by the way, that money's that, who gave them that money? Well, we would be part of that. So why would we then fund this activity that then could be used against us? So look, this is the only thing bipartisan about this agreement is the opposition. And it's fairly sizable.
So you did a poll on your Facebook page asking your constituents, and you said that 55% supported your belief that you know, this idea was no good. Some of the readers pointed out, you know, that's not a very scientific poll.
It wasn't a scientific poll.
But so you also said that you're continuing to listen to your constituents. Have they been continuing to support your decision, or have others raised concerns that, you know, if we don't do this deal, what's the option? Right,
absolutely. So a couple things. First of all, you know, with a PhD from Cornell, I'm very familiar what you know, scientific surveys are to look like. But look, part of what I do as a representative is listen all the time, even to questions here today. So you know, for the record, you know, we solicited feedback not just over Facebook, but we sent out email to tens of thousands of people to get their feedback as well, for a couple reasons. Number one is I'm a representative, so I need to understand where my constituency is. You know, those were the initial results. I can tell you that when you combine the phone calls and the emails we've received, the support for my position exceeds the 55%. Still, as you point out, there are those that do support the agreement, and so I look for common ground with them as well. And what I would say is the one thing that we nearly all agree on, nearly 100%, is that we want a negotiated settlement to this. We want a peaceful resolution to the situation with Iran. And that's something I firmly am committed to, and want to see us reject this agreement and go back to the negotiating table. Certainly that's challenging, but it's something that is in our best interest. And look, the construct, you always have to be careful, I think, with analogies. But if you look at the late 1970s and you look at the situation we had with the Soviet Union, we had tried, in quite candidly, in a bipartisan way throughout the 1970s, in an approach what was described as détente. And that was both parties that were supporting that agreement. We had a presidential candidate that disagreed with that and thought that was not in our best interest. He was roundly criticized. People thought he was a warmonger and that it was going to lead to conflict with the Soviet Union. But Ronald Reagan stuck to those principles of peace through strength, even though he was, again, pushed very significantly. He did win the election. He did adopt this approach. Ultimately, by the end of his time, we had the end of the Cold War. The Berlin Wall came down, and it came down really without a shot. And so I think that approach of peace through strength is one that can work. But we can't be in a situation of weakness, which is my perception of where we are with this agreement today. We didn't even talk yet about the verification problems, which the media has widely reported on in terms of this was billed to be 24/7 access. It's not 24/7 access. At best, it can be 24 days to areas that are not on the list now. Now keep in mind, I mentioned Fordow. Fordow is a site that the Iranians wouldn't acknowledge. So this would have been an example. If we start to gain intelligence that there's a site that's involved in this program, it wouldn't be on a list. We would then have to, the International Atomic Energy would then be involved in Iran to try to get access to that site. After 14 days, if they don't get resolution, it moves to the international realm where there are 8 votes. You have to have at least 5 votes or you can't even go see a site. So, we're giving up a lot of autonomy and sovereignty in this issue for something that we may never get access to some of these sites under this particular agreement.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit, you keep mentioning peace through strength. Do you think with that stance that we need more spending for military, or what's your thought on the current state of our military strength?
Well, very good question, because we are now really, 45 days, a little bit over 45 days from the beginning of the fiscal year. And, we need to get a budget agreement because going back to 2011, the intent of the Budget Control Act was to have the parties work together to complete the Budget Control Act so that we got a long-term agreement that was good for us, the current generation, but also for future generations to balance those needs. And as a backup to that, sequester was meant to be a forcing function to make sure that the parties agreed. And we defaulted to the sequester because we didn't get the bipartisan agreement. Well, in December of 2013, we did get a budget agreement for 2 years. That was the Ryan Murray budget agreement in December of 13 that staved off sequester for 2 years. But that sequester now goes back in place on 1 October. I have been an advocate for peace through strength and reforming the military. I've always said, and I'm on record and with detail, about how we can do that, but the sequester is not the way to do that. In fact, the sequester isn't the way to govern, period. So if we slam into this sequester, every service chief, each and every service chief that we have is on record under oath saying that if we hit the sequester, that the national security strategy has to change, because we don't have the resources to execute the national security strategy, and it will break our armed forces. So when, I think we need to listen to that, and we need to get a budget agreement. So, this is why I've been active. I've been shuttling back and forth between Paul Ryan, Leader McCarthy, Price, the chairman of the Budget Committee, and along with my chairman, Mac Thornberry, who's the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and trying to raise the saliency of how important it is. Because one of the things I've noticed, and this is interesting, my time in the military, we had a process for planning. Good at planning. In the military, we had windows. You had long-term planning, mid-term, and near-term planning, and then you had execution, coordination, and execution. I am underwhelmed at times in the United States Congress that, we seem to constantly be dealing with the 5-meter target when we have so many important issue areas that we need to be addressing that are just over the horizon. I mean, again, in the military, as a brigade commander, for example, I would be looking out a year, in some cases a year and a half. If you were a division or a corps commander, you would generally be anywhere from a year to 2 years out in planning. And here we're dealing with the sequester, the new budget year coming 1 October, and yet we don't have a plan yet. This is very concerning to me. We need something similar to what we were able to enact in December of 2013 a Ryan Murray, ideally to completely do away with sequester, but at least to push it off again for 2 years.
So that talks about the money aspect, but the current size and resources of our military, do you think that the current size of our military is adequate for this peace through strength?
Right. So here's the thing on this, is where we are today, for example, is we've just, we're about, for the Army, for example, we're about 495,000. Look, that number, if we were able to sustain that, I think at this moment, when you talk about peace through strength and the uncertainty that we're dealing with regard to Iran and the ascendant Russia, the problematic and quixotic North Korea, you know, where are we with China? We hope that that's economic competition. We want to keep it in that space. Then there's the Islamic State. All of these things, you know, 495,000 roughly, I think that we can continue to move forward with peace through strength. But here's the issue. The issue is this, is that if we get a replacement for sequester, the Army is scheduled over time to go to 450,000. Now that's already baked into the plan. If we don't get a replacement for sequester, and I mentioned it's a little over 45 days away, if we don't get a replacement for sequester, the Army goes to 420,000. See, so the question really is, you know, the question was initially posed to me is, do you think that the Army of today is about the right size? Well, again, that figure is 495. If we're able to get a replacement for the sequester, over time the Army goes to 450, but if we don't get a plan, then it goes to 420. These are very perilous moves, and I have spoken out against this. We need to get a budget agreement, and then we need to assess, because we still can off-ramp. You know, if we off-ramp, say we get a budget agreement, and that would then, the plan would still be 450, but we would have time to continue the negotiations so that maybe we could off-ramp and stay at 480. And, you know, I think anything, that was the Army that that was the figure most of the time that I served. Particularly the second half of my career, we were around 480 before 9/11. So I think the first thing we need to do is get a budget agreement so we don't end up going to 420, and then we ought to have bipartisan discussions about, you know, can we get an off-ramp so that we don't go all the way down to 450, and can we maybe stay around 480?
Okay. Yvonne, is there a question that you wanted to ask from the readers?
There is one question that's come through the thing. I have it up on the screen right now. There's somewhat of a statement.
So the food our farmers produce is only 1% of their production. If we decrease the amount of in-kind food aid, it won't hurt the American farmer. Why are you against a newer system that is being proven to be more effective in the field in emergency situations? I'm not sure I understand this one.
Yeah, I'm not familiar what the writer is saying I'm opposed to. What it may be is that there is discussion right now on our food aid program in general.
Mm-hmm.
So our food aid program to date is we grow food here, we ship it on our ships to other nations, and it is our commitment to peoples that are dealing with hunger and under production of agricultural pursuits. So I saw this firsthand. My last deployment, unexpectedly, my paratroopers, we were sent to Haiti in the aftermath of that devastating earthquake in January of 2010. And the food aid program there really made a difference. And by the way, not only in terms of the immediate need of the Haitian people, but I'm saying from a foreign policy standpoint, I saw other nations who were there. Most of the world was there helping us. We were shoulder to shoulder to help the Haitian people, and they saw what we were doing. And I know it made an impact. I mean, they saw us on our best day. Americans there for each other, Americans there for other people in a time of need. So I'm a believer in the food aid program. Now, there is a proposal to change the food aid program, instead of it being in-kind food, to give them money instead. So you see what I'm saying? Instead of it being American-grown food, there is a proposal from the administration to, instead of giving them American food and shipping it on American shipping, to instead give that nation just a check, and then they would, give it to their own farmers, theoretically. That's their argument.
Mhm.
Here's my issue with that, is that another issue I saw firsthand in Haiti was the issue of corruption. I mean, I will tell you that by the third day of dispensing aid in Haiti, and we were there to support the local government. So on the third day, the Haitian leadership made a rule that only women could pick up the aid from us. And this is because gangs had started getting access to our food aid. And they were then putting, basically using their own protocol to dispense the aid, and it wasn't good. And so the Haitian government decided that to cut down on the corruption, they're only going to allow women to pick up the aid. And well, here's the challenge with that, is the aid largely came in 100-pound bags. Now, quite candidly, there were a fair number of Haitian women that were able to carry 100 pounds, but not all could. So my paratroopers then, we helped the women as far as carrying it for them until we could get it back to their families. Here's my larger point, is if we were dealing with corruption with actual food aid, can you imagine how challenging that would have been if we just gave checks? So I don't support this proposed change. This may be with the this may be where the individuals, because the administration, look, I respect all points of view. I've just looked into it, and I disagree because I've seen firsthand the issue of corruption, and also part of the reason why I support, and many of our constituents support the food aid program as it's currently constructed, is because it helps American farmers, because they are also paid for the work that they've done. And by the way, not just farmers, but our hardworking seamen, they get employed by this too, by shipping it on U.S. ships. So I do oppose the proposed changes.
Okay. One of the other questions that readers have asked is, a couple of them actually asked, with this issue of veterans coming home with traumatic brain injuries,
Yeah.
So many of them are being housed out of state because there just aren't facilities here in New York to support the kind of care that they need. So they're away from their families and loved ones and their own individual family support. What are you doing to help New York address that issue of having our veterans housed elsewhere?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm supporting many different initiatives. Certainly the Wounded Warrior Initiative. On an annual basis, I attend the Stride, Wounded Warrior Stride dinner. That's in Rensselaer County, and it helps raise money to support our veterans that are making that transition, particularly those who have been grievously wounded. I've also been supporting, we do have some experimental work done on this, hyperbaric work that's done in the Albany area, and I've been referring that to the VA and to the committees of jurisdiction in the United States Congress. Make regular and frequent visits to our VA to make sure that I'm providing oversight. Look, this bill that we passed last year with the president's signature, I think is transformative. Now, the issue we've had is implementation. This is a bill that deals with the overarching VA and was responding to the revelations in Arizona, the issues of backlog and veterans waiting and in some cases losing their life over waiting for care. Congress took action. This new bill, essentially two pieces to it. One is it strengthens the VA. We brought on 27 new clinics, new doctors and nurses, and the ability to hire and fire. That was another issue inside the VA. But the second piece of this was more use of local doctors. This gets to the point of keeping people here. So what this bill did is it provided $10 billion in new authority that if an individual lived more than 40 miles from a major treatment facility, or if their appointment was greater than 30 days, they would then get, and we have mailed, what's called a choice card to veterans. I had one sent to me in the mail as well. And then they would then use a local network. As long as that local network accepted Medicare, they can take a veteran. So in my estimation, this is going to make a significant positive difference. Now here's been the trouble, and it's not uncommon. When you unveil new laws, there's always this sort of bumpiness when, any administration, by the way, can be a Republican or Democrat. But I was very frustrated with this. Initially, the administration had defined 40 miles as the crows flies. Now, How many veterans or seniors fly? They don't fly personally, they drive a car. So this was ridiculous. We have a very rural district, over 8,000 square miles. We had veterans that were up to 50 miles away from a VA facility, but yet the VA was saying, no, they're 39 miles, because as the crow flies. Now, we went back and forth with them a number of times, and for the record, the administration has walked that back. They now acknowledge that it's not 40 miles as the crow flies, it's 40 miles as how the trooper, the veteran, drives from home to the facility. The second piece had to do with definition of a major treatment facility. So what happened is the administration defined these clinics that we have. We're fortunate to have the clinics too. I'm very thankful for that. But when you go to a clinic, you're really doing some preventive, maybe getting prescription or something like that. But you're not getting a colonoscopy, for example, at a clinic. That you're going to go to a major treatment facility. So what I was finding in my casework is I had veterans who were waiting longer than 30 days and were further away than 40 miles, and they weren't being approved for their choice cards. And I said, this is clearly a violation of the law. What's going on here? And they said, well, no, because they're actually only hypothetically 16 miles from the clinic. But the clinic's not doing that work. If the individual's just going for a checkup, then yes, they should go to the clinic. But if they're needing major work that you only get done at a treatment facility, then that should be the standard there. And so if we need to, we should move to the local doctors. So now the good news is this. About 2 weeks ago, we passed the VA Accountability Act, which is following up on all this. And we clarified that in the law that received bipartisan support, including Sean Maloney from the Hudson Valley. So we believe we're making our way through this, and we think that's what's going to help improve the question that the individual has, that there'll be more treatment here locally in New York for our veterans. And we're going to stay on this. I mean, I mentioned Agent Orange. This is an issue area. About 40% of my casework is in the area of veterans. And very proud of what Ulster did here. We supported in linking up Soldier On, which is an entity that works through the VA for current ops spending. But what my kind and what Ulster County did for the veterans home here, I think is a very positive step forward. And we look to do our part by ensuring that per diem money that comes by way of the VA was linked up. And that's just examples of how we're working on that issue. I have another visit to the VA coming up this Friday. I'm going to Castle Point.
So you're visiting the different VA centers?
Yes.
Okay.
And clinics.
Okay. So another question was whether you agree with Jeb Bush, one of the Republican presidential candidates, about his brother's commitment to withdraw from Iraq implemented by President Obama and Hillary Clinton, whether that was a mistake, that the U.S. military occupation of Iraq should have remained open-ended, and did you embrace the withdrawal at the time? And if not, can you identify statements you made in opposition to the withdrawal?
No, I supported it. Look, I mean, the biggest issue, if you look back to 2011, we had done our work to train the Iraqi security forces. What has happened since that time is that leader, Prime Minister Maliki, he fired a lot of competent commanders. He cut off the funding to those units. And most significantly is he governed in a very sectarian way. This is a country that about 25% of the country is Sunni. And, they needed to believe that they were going to have a fair shot in the new Iraq. And when Maliki ruled in such a way that they felt like they didn't have an opportunity in the new Iraq, they started a fight. They took up arms and they supported others that were taking up arms. The biggest issue Iraq had from 2011 to 2013, 2014 was not the absence of U.S. military ground forces. The biggest issue they had was a corrupt and ineffective government. And this really has to be the lesson learned here is, well, there's many actually. And I think I've spoken to others too as far as peace through strength and being very careful about introducing U.S. forces. And I'm the author of the War Powers Reform Act that would ensure that it would restore the balance to the legislative executive branch relationship so that the people get a voice through their representatives before we commit troops to war. Like if my bill would have been law, the president wouldn't have been able to bomb Libya, without congressional approval. But yet he did. And he's not just President Obama, although President Obama did that, and that was a mistake. Republican presidents have done this too. Presidents from both political parties have taken us off to war without the consent of the governed. I think it would be the wrong lesson to take that we, needed to keep ground forces in Iraq in perpetuity. That's the wrong lesson. The right lesson is well, first of all, to think through on the front end what you do, but then on the back end is to put the proper political pressure for reform. And we had leverage. We had leverage because we actually did keep a residual force there through the embassy. So it's not like there was zero. We had trainers in Iraq, and we had a security force that was there, robust security force to protect American people in the green zone. The issue wasn't the lack of ground forces, in my view. It was the corrupt and the ineffective leadership of Iraq that caused individuals who lived in Iraq to rise up.
So let's talk about some more issues that are pertinent to people in the Hudson Valleys rather than the national level.
Mm-hmm.
So what specifically are you working on here in the Hudson Valley in terms of broadband? I know that Kingston Mayor Shane Gallo last week urged the PSC to have Verizon use the money that it's collected from users to actually install FiOS in the city of Kingston because he felt that they'd waited long enough, that they needed that. And I know that broadband is something that hasn't reached every corner of our area. So what are you doing with those issues?
So we're supporting the mayor first and foremost. We've been involved with correspondence and phone calls supporting the mayor's explicit ask of the Public Service Commission and Verizon for fiber here in Kingston. I'm also working very closely with David Salway. He leads the New York State broadband expansion effort. And look, we've got a couple federal programs that we've brought to bear in this area. The first comes by way of the Farm Bill. That's the Rural Utility Service. And that provides for both grants for telemedicine and for rural areas. And it also provides for low interest loans. That's the Farm Bill. And in addition to that, we have a bigger program that comes by way of the FCC, and that's the Connect America Fund. The Connect America Fund has billions of dollars in it. In my view, the travesty is in the early years that it wasn't being spent. So in other words, we can have a discussion. Is the federal government providing enough impetus and support to expand broadband? And I would say we need to do better. But then the issue is, what about the money we appropriated? In other words, money that was there. We weren't even spending it. And it was, in my view, because of rules that were put in place. The first round of the Connect America Fund essentially carved out the money for the big companies, for all the major corporations, for their expansion efforts. Well, look, these major corporations in many cases didn't even ask for the money or spend it because they didn't think that the profit margins were wide enough. This is why myself and others wrote to the FCC chairman, and we said in the second and third rounds, please change the rules to allow our company-owned businesses, and we have many of them here, our family-owned businesses here in New York 19, not just the Hudson Valley, but the Catskill Mountain region that needs help, and also Central New York I represent parts of, and the Capital District area. We wanted the rules changed to allow for family-owned businesses like Delhi, Tel, and Margaretville, Tel, and Hancock, and just to name some. And we wanted the co-ops. I actually have 2 active co-ops, electrical co-ops in this district, one in Otsego County and one in Delaware County. Now, fortunately, the chairman did listen, and he changed the rules. So we think that now with this program, the Connect America Fund, and in fact, it's working. If you look at in Delaware County, we actually have 3 different areas where we are building out significantly. We're working to support Mayor Gallo on this. I'm not satisfied. To me, I think the whole broadband build-out has been like 2 yards in a cloud of dust, maybe 3 yards if we're lucky. But it's not been at the pace that I would hope, but we're continuing to press this. I have somebody on my deputy district director is focused on this. Ann Muller has been recognized for her excellence in this area. And whether it goes to supporting applications for federal monies or coordinating federal state activities, because the state now has pledged $500 million to work in this space, or I should say $500 billion to work in this space. And we need to work together on this to get this done.
You've also mentioned that you've been involved in the Lyme disease issue, and we have high rates of Lyme disease in Dutchess County. So what specifically have you been working on currently in terms of identifying Lyme disease and getting proper treatment?
Yeah, so a number of different things. You could look at the areas of prevention Then you can look in diagnosis, and then you can look at treatment and insurance company coverage. I think all of those areas we need to make progress. We have made some progress in prevention, not only in terms of saliency. In fact, some of the data shows drops in some cases in parts of our district in terms of public service announcements and how individuals should prepare when they go outside. What are some actions you can take when you come back? And then also we have a new product that has passed tests and we're looking to commercialize called Lyme Shield. Lyme Shield used the same ecological approach that we use to get after rabies. It's a pellet. It's introduced in the wild. When the mice ingest it, it severs the link. It cleans them of the Lyme and vaccinates them going forward, and it severs this tie, between the mice, the mice, the deer, and people. So what we really need to do is commercialize Lyme Shield now, and we'll see progress on this. Keep in mind that a couple decades ago we had a vaccine for Lyme. It was pulled from the market because we had issues with the vaccine, and we had some very regrettable deaths, and we had some serious injuries. So what the state now is we actually have a vaccine for pets, but we don't have a vaccine for people, because ultimately we want to prevent individuals from getting Lyme. That ultimately where we want to be is preventing people from getting Lyme and tick-borne diseases. Look, this is so important for our health and for all moral reasons, but it's also important for our economy. When you look at this Hudson Valley region, over $4 billion in tourism. So much of that is outdoor tourism, and here we're working on efforts to increase that in this county and others. The last thing we want to do is scare people away from the major metropolitan area who want to come here and enjoy our beautiful climes and environment. So, preventing this is certainly major priority. And then when you look at diagnosis, how can it be that a country as great as ours, we don't even have a test that picks up half the cases of Lyme? We basically use a dual track approach of an ELISA test, and then and then we have what's called a Western blot test. We put these together and we try to make determinations as to whether or not you have Lyme. But here's the major issue there. These rely on an approach, a modality that draws your blood and looks for evidence that your body is fighting the disease. Well, what we know is with the spirochete, this is pernicious. First of all, you may not even show evidence that the body's fighting it for weeks. And individuals are most heightened by this when they get the tick bite. So they'll go into the doctor and say, I got this tick bite, can we test? And the body's not yet at a stage where it's fighting it to show up positive. Now, the good news there is it appears that we have a test that, particularly in Europe, there's one, it's a protein-based test that will show immediately elevations of proteins based on exposure to Lyme. Now, what we're doing with our bill, HR 789, which is the Tick-Borne Disease Research Accountability and Transparency Act, which we got incorporated into HR 6, the 21st Century Cures Bill, is we're addressing what I believe is really the fundamental problem, and that is where we are in terms of the guidelines that come out of the Centers for Disease Control. Because right now, those guidelines, in my view, have not been updated. They're very narrow, and that's in part the challenge we're having with diagnosis and treatment. And when I go to the CDC and I say, how come you haven't updated these guidelines? There's a lot of research out there that shows the existence of chronic Lyme, for example. The CDC pushes back. This is a controversy in the medical community. They say, well, if the science was there, then we'd change the guidelines. But we have had studies that, in my view, they're double-blind, methodologically sound, and they don't get published. In part because really a system that is meant to be virtuous, in my view, is non-virtuous. They use this anonymity of the refereed up or down on publishing, and we don't even know who turns these studies down. That's the reason for the bill. The bill 789 does a couple things. One is brings transparency, because it requires the Secretary of Health and Human Services to have a plan to deal with tick-borne diseases, including chronic Lyme, and it has a working group. For the first time ever, it forms a working group of federal and non-federal partners. Those are our patients, patient advocates, and doctors that are going to get a voice in where this research allocation goes, and then we'll then get the reports. When we get the reports of that, we believe that's going to lead to changes in the guidelines. And when we get changes in the guideline, when I press the insurance companies and I say, my people are suffering for, in some cases, years, and they're paying tens of thousands of dollars out of their own pocket. How come you're not paying for more of it? Their response is, well, if it was approved care, we'd pay for more of it. Now you're back to the guidelines. This is why this bill, we think, is so important, because of how it will bring forward these diverse scientific viewpoints that will ultimately change the guidelines and lead to better treatment protocols and better insurance company coverage.
And I just wanted to talk to you, since we're down to about 10 more minutes here. When you took office, you did so with the intent of having self-imposed term limits.
Mhm.
And it was my understanding that you were originally saying no more than 4 terms in office. So this is your 3rd term.
Right.
You said this is your last term in Congress, U.S. Congress. So why 3 terms, not 4 terms? What made you decide now to not seek re-election?
Well, first of all, I'll say you accurately described that. I said that the most I would serve would be 8 years or 4 terms. I have decided that this will be my final tour in the United States Congress, and that will make 6 years or 3 tours. And that is because I'm seriously considering looking at running statewide here in New York State, particularly for the position of governor. I'm looking at that very seriously, and I recognize the challenges associated with a Republican running for governor in New York. Look, the mountain to climb would be very steep. The voter registration in the state, about 49% of those registered in New York State are registered in the Democratic Party. Not quite 24% are registered in the Republican Party, and then the balance are either in one of the minor parties or unaffiliated with the party. So there's a significant disadvantage when it comes to party enrollment. And then when you look at the money, the factor of money in politics, I mean, the fact of the matter is, and I've believed in this all my life, including when I was in combat, I mean, you have to start with the reality that you're in. You could try to pretend to live in an alternative universe. It never works. I mean, the fact of the matter is, any Republican that runs for governor in this state is going to be outspent. And so the challenges are significant between voter registration and with an asymmetry in terms of monies in the campaign funds. Any successful candidate on the Republican ticket is going to have to start early, and is going to have a very focused effort. If you declare for governor in the year of the election, you're not going to be successful. And so I felt that I needed to complete my tour in the United States Congress. If I decide to go forward, if our family decides to go forward with this, we need to be in a situation where I'm a private citizen again, and I'm able to give it 2 years of full-time work to campaign. Now, even though this mountain is very steep, I believe that we can climb it. I think for a variety of reasons. I look at Governor Cuomo and I see that he has alienated so many constituencies. This will be 2 terms already. I mean, candidly, I think we should have no governor should serve for more than 2 terms. I've called on the governor to self-impose term limits and declare it's his last term. If I were a candidate, I would certainly pledge and follow through on that pledge to self-impose to not more than 2 terms. And governor. And then I'd ask the legislature to send me legislation to codify that, to put it into law. And, I look at the way that the governor leads, and, I mean, candidly, he's a bully. And the way that he approaches government, and he has turned off so many people. So I think there is an opportunity for us. My track record, I was one of 3 Republicans in the United States of America, in the country, serving in Democratic, what's considered in Washington, D.C., a Democratic seat. This is a district that voted for President Obama twice, and the last time by over 6 points. And in the last election, I was outspent over 2-1 in this district that favors Democrats, and yet we won by 30 points. So I think we have a record of bringing people together, and we talked earlier in this session of the success we're having in this 114th Congress in bringing forward constituent-driven legislation. I gave you a rundown of what we're doing on Lyme disease. That was constituent-driven. I've learned all this. Nearly all of it I learned since I retired from the Army, and from people who are dealing with this scourge, and have been listening and looking to bring forward them ideas and legislation that reflects, what these people want to see in our government. And by the way, this goes back to my opening statement, where we are a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And even though I find people disaffected and alienated from that, part of what I've been trying to do is to bring back faith in our government that we can do this. And so this is why ultimately I decided that this would be my final tour. Now keep in mind, I also said at that moment that my number 1 priority was to be the best representative I could be for my final 2 years, and I'm following through on that pledge.
quickly, we were talking about money in politics. This is something that came up in your last campaign when you were challenged by Sean Eldridge. And we've also talked about corruption in government, and there's a lot of concern amongst voters here in the U.S. about corruption in government. So, and money in politics. In your run for governor, if you ultimately, your family and you decide to do that, how would you assure the public that money would be kept out of your policies and that you would work to address the corruption that they see in Albany?
Yeah, well, number one, leadership by example. I mentioned self-imposing term limits and following through on that, and also the fact that my wife and I voluntarily give back the pension that we earned, because I don't think public office should be used for private gain. And I also think leadership by example. When the governor said this past session, he said, well, I want more disclosure in the legislature. He didn't go first. I think in anything that a leader does, like for an infantry leader, no successful infantry leader tells his troops, her troops, go take that hill. An infantry leader gets out front and says, we're going to the hill, follow me. That's what inspires people to accomplish and to achieve great things. And that's what was really missing in this effort to deal with corruption, is a governor who goes first. And as it relates to campaign finance, look, one of the things that I really lament is the fact that I offered a challenge to my last opponent. I said, look, let's be example. Let's be an example for the country. Let's impose limits on how much we'll spend. Let's report what we receive, and let's reject all outside spending. And we could have been an example. People talk about how hard it is to enact campaign finance reform, and I have seen that to be true. But if we had a race that was an example of what campaign finance would look like, then I think we could break down these barriers to get the kind of reform. So, you can expect that I would take a similar approach if I decide to run for governor, that I would offer a similar challenge. And that, we would put parameters on how we are raising money, spending it, and accounting for it.
So even if, if you run for governor, even if your opponent doesn't want limits on accepting campaign contributions, would you still publicly state how much you're receiving and who you're receiving it from? Would you let the public know where every dollar is
Well, I
coming
would certainly comply with all the laws currently on the books. My record reflects that. But I wouldn't unilaterally disarm. I mean, I don't think that would be wise. I would hope that in a challenge that two individuals could enter into an agreement that would be worthy of the people's support and would be a great example of what reform would look like going forward.
Okay. And we've got just a few more minutes. Is there anything that you want to touch on in just these last few minutes, a closing statement that you want to make to constituents watching? Or
Well, first of all, thank you for tuning in, and I hope we replay it so individuals can have an opportunity to see this. I've got all kinds of meetings set up this month to meet with constituents. I'm looking forward to that. And as I said at the outset, this is a real privilege to serve. We are going to continue to press all the way through for our time serving you in the 19th Congressional District, and I hope to see folks out and about.
so later on today, you're going to have meetings at your Kingston office, correct?
That's correct.
Do you have lots lined up to meet with your constituents?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a pretty healthy array of individuals coming in today just to talk on the full spectrum, some of which we've hit the issues here today, and another, I think we have, John Finch is coming in, so we'll get the latest update on the Kingston hospitals, and I think I have Cozzolino coming in today to talk about some of his work he does on manufacturing and also job training. We passed a good bill in the Congress that helps support job training. And and some others coming in to talk about issues that they're passionate about.
So when can we expect a decision from you on whether you're going to run for state government?
So the final decision would come as I complete my tour in the Congress. But it's fair to say that I'm taking this very seriously. I've been in over half the counties. As I mentioned, it's quite a climb to reach the summit of this mountain, given the challenges here in New York. And so, like any operation I went through in the military, I would certainly be working to set the conditions for success even now.
So maybe in January 2017 you'll have a specific answer?
Well, yeah, so I'm saying at the end of my tour in the Congress, we would have something official to state on the score.
And you'll come here and tell us.
Well, you'll
live
certainly be
stream it.
invited. Yeah.
Anything
you.
else, Yvonne, that you want to touch on?
That was my question, so.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Thank you,
Well,
folks.
thank you so much for coming out. We appreciate you meeting with us.
Best wishes. Thank you so much.